I've got my pen and I've got my notes, and we have a really thorough presentation prepared. But what are the top two or three things that you wish you knew before you joined church development about how to prepare for a church capital campaign?
Well, as an associate pastor serving in churches for about 18 years full time, and going through a couple of capital campaigns during that time, I would have liked to have known what should staff expect. And I think maybe some anxiety that I had was, is there going to be a lot of extra work for the
Mhm,
staff,
mhm,
or will the outside organization doing the campaign, organizing, planning it,
mhm.
assisting, would they be, sharing the load, doing a lot of the heavy lifting? So
That's
that's
a great
something.
question. What is
I
the load going to be?
also had concern when I was on church staff about, well, now if people are giving 3-year pledges to a capital campaign,
Mhm,
won't that affect the week to week giving? uh,
mhm.
that
Very important.
supports the annual budget, the mission, the ministries, staff salaries, et cetera.
Mhm, mhm.
So those are a couple of main things that I think, and I think those might be questions for those who are attending today as well.
Well, if you have questions or concerns, please click them into the chat. And Meredith is going to make sure that we address each of those as we go forward. She's very thorough and professional. And I know that it is a little bit anxiety producing when one has to prepare for a church capital campaign. So we have produced a pretty thorough presentation for you, and we are willing to do this for your committee at your church. And it doesn't cost anything. We do this just literally every week with some church across the country, whether you're Presbyterian or Lutheran or Catholic or Unity or Episcopalian. We work with all denominations, and we bring over 30 years of experience and over $1 billion raised. And we'll give you this webinar. Just the fact that you signed up, we'll send it to you when we are done. We're supposed to do our introductions, and my name is Dennis Greene. I've been working with church development for 32 years, and it has been my great joy. And married and got a bunch of kids, and my wife works for our church in charge of weddings and funerals, and she's a very happy person. Darryl, what would you say about yourself?
Well, I've been in ministry all my adult life. After seminary, I served churches in the Midwest and in the South for, I believe, 18 years as associate pastor, and I have a church music background. Then transitioned about 18 years ago and have been in stewardship and church fundraising since. Most of those years, as I mentioned, have been with Denis Greene uh, and church development. Rebecca and I been married for 38 years, have one son, Daniel, who's getting ready to turn 29. So I feel a deep sense of calling to this area of ministry, and have been affirmed over and over with opportunities to be able to help churches achieve their dreams and their goals through what we offer at church development.
Great. Great to have you here. Now, I think that's a picture of Darryl there on your right saying we have a plan. Yes, we do have a plan.
Yeah.
And we have an action-packed agenda. Please, again, type in any questions and concerns you have, and we'll address them as we go. We want to talk about before you do a capital campaign, it's real important to engage your leaders. And by that, I mean both opinion leaders, formal structure, and third, uh, potential leadership donors as well. Gathering information is very time intensive, but it's critical. Building consensus is essential. I mean, the key to failure, and I'm a big fan of that great American philosopher Chuck Norris, who once said, The key to success is to figure out what doesn't work and then don't do that. Okay. Consensus is one of those things. If you don't have consensus, people will give modestly. I don't want to say they won't give, but they might give you a $20 gift. They might say, "Oh, yeah, love the plan. Yes, do whatever you came up with. Yes, I'll totally give," and give $20 when they could give 20,000. Consensus is one of the keys to unlocking generosity. Conducting a feasibility is very important. We call it the ask before the ask. That's half of it. And the other half is we're gathering data on what we need to do to precisely design a campaign to meet the unique, specific needs of your congregation. So it is like an x-ray before surgery. It is vital. We'll show you what it looks like, how much time it takes. We'll also talk about communication. And just like the silly little video on your right, video is now a very important part of that. And at every step of the way, on your website, your emails, Facebook, Instagram, text messages, it has to have that video component. We'll talk more about communicating um, and 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 how to move from where you are right now into a state of action. So I'd like to know from you what's holding you back. What are your reservations? What are your concerns? Between Darryl and I and the rest of the church development team, we have about 300 church capital campaigns under our belt, and have um, we have raised over $1 billion. uh, I I like the approach of combining faith and reason. So we have a lot of research-based practices. We've written a book called The Stewardship System. We'll give it to you for free. It includes all the factors that influence generosity. And when you read it, you see, oh my goodness, this doesn't look like fundraising. No, it doesn't. It looks like engagement and discernment. That's what it looks like. It is not high pressure door to door. We want to develop the culture of stewardship. And there is a science related to that. I would encourage you all to read the book, Why Catholics Don't Give. It was written by Charles Zeck and a group of researchers out of Villanova. He himself, being a Catholic, has the latitude to criticize his denomination. And why do Catholics give 1.2% of their income when our Protestant brethren give 2.2%? That's a good question. I learned a new word when I read that book: obfuscation. To be obfuscative is to be cloudy and not clear and not transparent. I remember it because I was very enamored with that word. I read the book. I told my wife about it at dinner. We had a conversation. Our daughter was only about 4 years old at the time, and she asked about what does obfuscative mean, and I explained it to her and used it in a sentence. The next day, we get a note on pinned to her shirt when she came home from preschool that said, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Greene, your daughter used the word obfuscative in a sentence today at preschool. What are you doing in your home to this poor child?" That's one of my favorite words now, and it's really clear we need to not be obfuscative. So our mission as a company is to be focused on prayerful discernment instead of pressure. And we want to focus on community building, increasing the strength of the tapestry of your congregation instead of divide and conquer. Scott Peck, the fellow who wrote the book, The Road Less Traveled, also wrote a book on community building called The Different Drum. I would encourage you to read that. What we're going to talk about today is a perfect reflection of what Scott Peck said was the best way to build the strength of your community. And the community building activities we're going to propose work. They don't take much time and they don't cost much money, but boy, do they work. And if you don't do it, you're flirting with disaster. Now, we even measure what does disaster look like. And let me tell you what disaster looks like. You only raise this much money. If you do what we're going to cover today, you raise this much money. So we have the metric. So those who don't do what we're going to cover today raise about 50% of annual giving in 3-year pledges. Over the past 30 years, since we've implemented this, those who do the community building and discernment usually raise 2.5 times annual giving. Now, those are variations. There are variations there. Some churches raise 7 times annual giving, some churches only raise one. But the return on investment in capital campaigns is you spend $1 and you raise 10. That's the national average. And we're significantly above that. We're usually 20 to 1 for every dollar we're paid, because this is what we do. We're church capital campaign consultants, and we love giving away everything that we know. But if you do a church capital campaign, please give us a call and allow us to make a sales presentation. And then you see, with us, you spend $1 and you raise 20 or $30. That would be a little closer to our norm. Our best fundraising practices include top donor cultivation, foundation research. We're blessed with a really sharp member of our team, Becky Summers, who's got 30 years experience in foundation research and grant writing, and she turns over new sources of revenue just all the time. We do planned giving in the 3-year follow-up. We invite everybody to include the church in their estate plans. We help you in those following 3 years with pledge follow-up, and we nurture your planned giving. We want your offertory to increase as well. So it's a stewardship paradigm and a blend of fundraising practices. We want to make sure we're discernment based in our ask. We have a community building focus, and we want a widespread shared decision-making process so people own the campaign. We begin, scripture is kind of our inspiration. Everybody has been blessed with something. So whatever you've been blessed with, think about how you can use that to serve one another. And that's kind of been our driving theme, supported by a heck of a lot of research. So this is me, 30 years experience, raised a ton of money, written several books, and had my research published. And Darryl, talk a little bit more about yourself, buddy, as we begin to leap into action here.
Well, annual stewardship is a big topic with what we do, because that's kind of our first fruits of giving, if you will. And so we want to make sure that, the church is strong with annual stewardship. And as I mentioned early on, a concern that often churches and committees have is our annual stewardship. How can we do a capital campaign if we're not meeting week to week offerings in our budget? And so we have a lot of resources. Denis has addressed some of that with the stewardship system. But then our expertise and methodology really applies even further into capital campaigns. These are over and above gifts that churches raise for building projects. It can be to pay off debt, for spruce up, renovate, could be new construction, or it could be like a complete new location for a church. But I've had the experience of being in the trenches, being lead consultant on well over 100 capital campaigns with church development. And so, as Denis mentioned, engagement is such a key component. And I love to see that. It starts with the feasibility study and it continues several steps along the way. And you can see as people begin feeling a part of a capital campaign, and when they're sensing ownership and they're feeling a part of it and they're a part of the decision making. So those are a few things that are kind of at my heart, close to home in working with churches.
Great. Thanks, buddy. So we have a lot of sources of data. Now, number 4 on your screen, we're members of many different associations: the International Catholic Stewardship Council, National Association of Church Business Administrators, Support Center, National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, Association of Fundraising Professionals. We get data from everyone, and my favorite is number 3. We read a lot of academia and corporate sources, but I'm a big fan of this person, Daniel Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize in behavioral economics. They have behavioral economics has a lot to offer us in the church capital campaign business, and we'll refer back to them frequently. Okay, so now here's our agenda. Let's leap into action with number one, engaging leaders, which we've got to do before we gather information, build consensus, conduct a feasibility study, communicate, or leap into action. Okay, and there is the patron saint of capital campaigns, Gandalf, preparing us for battle. Yes, indeed. Okay, so just thinking of your congregation, the normal source is to look at your current leadership team. Okay, it could be one of a variety of names. You can begin there, then look beyond that to your past volunteer leaders and look at your lead donors as well. It's very important to ask their opinion early on, one-on-one and small groups, and find someone who has the capacity to lead, who has the capacity and the energy. And the only way you find out is by talking to people. Recently I read a book by Malcolm Gladwell that posed the question, how does any change happen? And he taught me a new word like obfuscative. The word is maven. And what it means is opinion leader. So in any church, you have a handful of people who are totally immersed in the life of the church, know everybody, volunteer for everything, been around for a while, and just their life is church. Well, by golly, connect with them early on, even if they're just the most modest of donors. Connect with them to get their pulse and to get their input. So once you engage them and ask their opinion, then they're emotionally and spiritually on your side. The worst case scenario is if you show up and you say, I have a plan and you need to give to it. That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is engage your leaders by saying, we together have a challenge. I'd like your input on possible solutions. What do you think we should do about this? Don't leap to a solution that you've already thought about. Just begin with the challenge. Now, the source of what I'm saying today comes from the science of synectics. S-Y-N is how that is spelled. Synectics. S-Y-N-E-C-T-I-C-S. And it is the science of group decision making. And if you begin with the challenge, that leads to, well, what are the values that we want to make sure are included in our decision-making process? So let's get agreement on what is the problem, what values do we want to embrace before we leap into solutions. So we're going to ask a bunch of people before we do it. Like at my church, if you were going to do a capital campaign in my church, you would ask my wife, Jenny Greene, because for the last 20 or so years, she's been up at church a couple times a week, volunteering for every single thing under the sun, knows everybody, and would give you a good opinion. And then she would communicate it with everybody that she knows as well. Okay, so number one, engaging leaders. Darryl, am I leaving anything out about step one, engaging leaders?
No, I think you hit it spot on. It's just such a crucial part. And sometimes I think churches are a little bit um, frightened by that prospect of engaging leaders, getting their opinions. But that really is the first step in getting their buy-in and ownership. And ultimately, you raise more money and you have a stronger church.
Great. Right. And I don't want to be ruthless, but if you had no spiritual values at all, these are still good practices because you raise the maximum amount of money. People think the way you raise money is you go door to door and you say, here's a pledge card, fill it in while I wait. Okay, people have that imagination of fundraising. Well, that's just about the worst thing you can do. You will raise money, but it will be this much money instead of this much money. And furthermore, people are alienated. Furthermore, weekly giving goes down. And the worst thing of all is some people are going to quit the church and leave because they're so mad. And what was missing? Well, this step of engagement. That's just really key. All right, let's talk about number two, gathering of information. This takes a little bit of time to define what is the problem and what are the metrics that we can examine related to human impact. So let's look at the facilities, the cost, we're going to get estimates, and then we're going to look at our solutions and options. But I really love this case study, Prince of Peace in Kearney, Nebraska, where this drawing you're looking at right here was the result of a whole lot of town hall meetings and a whole lot of engagement, a whole lot of consensus. And under A, human impact, one of the questions that preceded their second phase of building is, how do we welcome visitors? And one of the answers that came out of that was not very well. They had a foyer the size of a phone booth, and church architecture theory today says your foyer needs to be 30% the size of your worship space. Why? Because that's where the social interaction happens. George Barna wrote a book titled Church Shopping. He coined the term. He's a wonderful researcher. And what we discovered was your foyer is absolutely critical. That's where the greeting happens. One of the things that I learned from Zech and the Why Catholics Don't Give is those churches that have an assertive welcoming process have giving 9% above average. So where does that happen? Well, it doesn't happen once people are sitting down. It's got to happen. The newbies got to be welcomed as they come in. You need greeters at every door. They need to be extroverts to just say, "Hi, I'm Denis Greene. Be welcome to church. Can I connect you with any of our interesting ministries or small groups? What are your interests? Come." And then you got a friend. So the foyer is where that happens. A whole lot of consensus building preceded that. Okay, you got to get estimates on facility costs. I have a great church building architectural firm that I can connect you with to talk to somebody who's built more than 100 churches, and they can give you an estimate based on your city and the construction costs in a minute. And now you've got some data to move ahead. So facility estimates and cost estimates can happen real quickly. Call me, send me an email. We have got lots of wonderful resources. If you need a facilitator for visioning, I have that. If you need a banker, I have one of those as well. So I've got a lot of people in this world that I think are wonderful that I can connect you with that would happily answer your questions at no cost to you, and you'll have made a new friend as well. All right, Darryl, before we move on, have I missed anything about gathering information?
I think you got it. Yeah, it's great.
All right, so this takes a little bit of time. Somebody's got to be your leader to move the ball ahead. It's an important phase. Okay, the next subject, building consensus, is critical. Though I observed the worst possible scenario one time. I was at a church that was considering hiring us, and I attended church there, and I heard a person say from the pulpit, "So I've developed this plan, and everyone here needs to give money to it." And I thought, oh my gosh, could you have said anything worse? It was the worst, and needless to say, it did not turn out well. When we build consensus, we want to ask for input, and we want to keep it pretty high level. We don't want to ask what color to paint the bathrooms. We want to ask questions like we did here at St. Charles. Do we need a foyer? Should we go through the time and effort and expense to expand our church narthex dramatically so that we do a better job of welcoming members and visitors? That's the question. And you should not ask them, how many windows should we have on the south side? You want to get it on the big picture value based perspective. You want to share information, ballpark estimates. They don't have to be precise, but it's going to cost approximately between X and Y. Other information that you might share, you might take from best practices in church construction, like the 30% that I mentioned just a moment ago. I also mentioned church shopping trends. That's another bit of information that you might that you might want to think about sharing. I am a big fan of item C, town hall meetings. Now, there is one magical component that is absolutely essential, and that is having a facilitator. And the facilitator has got to be pretty nimble and pretty thick-skinned because they are messy. Town hall meetings are always messy, and there are tangential comments and good meaning people who talk way too much. But boy, they're so critical because gives everybody a chance to speak and be heard. And it gives everybody a chance to hear others and what are their thoughts and feelings as well. It doesn't cost you hardly anything. It doesn't take much time. You just got to announce, after each service this weekend, we're going to have a town hall meeting. We want to share this challenge that we're experiencing as a church and talk about some initial ideas. And we want to know what you think. Okay. And that's about it. People show up. I like the idea of having tables and you get maybe 6 or 8 or 10 at a table and you've got one facilitator per table. You have one facilitator up front. You ask a question, have everybody talk at their tables, and then each table facilitator reports. So you could have hundreds of people in this room. Now, you just did this recently at a church in Oklahoma, right there? And it's
Yes.
a little bit of a controversial project. How'd that go?
It ultimately went well. We had two really well attended town hall meetings. I think there were about 100 people attend each of the town hall meetings, and it was based on the church didn't really feel comfortable doing a capital campaign without knowing what's the 5-year outlook. How does this fit in with the overall vision where we're headed? And so those two town halls kind of got at the heart of that beginning of the visioning process. And one of the key components was feeding that information back that we learned at the town hall back to the congregation. So that kind of goes in with B that's on your screen, share the information. It's really important to be transparent, to build consensus. That there's not just a committee that ultimately is making all the decisions, but that your input, everyone's input is important. And so publish a 1 or 2 page e-newsletter, e-blast. Thank you for coming to the recent town hall meeting. Thank you for your input. This is what we heard you say. And so that goes a long way in building the consensus that Denis is talking about.
Yeah, well, thank you, Darryl. And one of the things I felt like you did really well is you related each one of these facility challenges back to the why. What's our mission?
Mm-hmm.
What's our vision? What's our purpose? And each one of these facility improvements was connected back to that. So I really like that TED Talk, Begin with the Why by Simon Sinek. I really think that is important. B is where you share that. This is why we're doing it. Here's our mission and our ministry, what we seek to accomplish. And here's how each one of these facility elements relate to that. That dialogue about the why is a very fruitful one, and it's a big picture, and it connects to why am I a member of this church in the first place. Now, we didn't talk much about D. SurveyMonkey is free. You could do a 3-question survey about driving values. We're working with a church in Colorado right now where we're about to do that, and in particular we want to focus on people who are not engaged. And we want to invite and explore greater investment and engagement in ministry. So what could we do to better serve you? Would you be interested in a short-term volunteer opportunity? So the surveying now is inexpensive and it is quick. You can email it out to everybody. And Darryl, what's your opinion? When we send out a survey, you get 90% of your feedback that you're ultimately going to get. How many days after you send that survey out? Is it 1 day, 2 days, 2 weeks? What's your experience?
Well, generally we'll get most of the feedback within the first 4 or 5 days, but generally speaking, we'll have it circulating for about 2 weeks. We'll have most people take it online, but not to leave out anyone. We'll have hard copies either mailed to those who are not email, folks, or we'll have it to where they can pick it up, in the church office. So really want to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to fill it out. But first few days, that's when the majority of the people fill it out.
Great. Thank you, Darryl. All right, I just checked on our chat and I had a really good question that was asked. What kind of time expectation should we address of staff during the capital campaign and the subsequent 3 years? That's a really good question. But the church in Oklahoma that Darryl talked about just a moment ago initially wanted to do it themselves with just a little bit of coaching from us. And at the last minute, the staff person who was going to put in the time quit and took another job. And so by default, they then hired us to be servants of the church in a comprehensive level. Halfway through, Darryl, you told me this quote, halfway through the chair, what did the chair say so eloquently?
Yeah, really, with great emotion. We are so glad that we hired you all. This would be so overwhelming for us. So, and that kind of flies in the face of when we do a capital campaign, it usually takes us around 500 hours to do it and really do the engagement right. So they began seeing that pretty quickly into the capital campaign process. And they felt like we made the right decision hiring church development to do the heavy lifting, as we say.
Right, right, right. And it could easily take 1,000 hours,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the size of the church and the complexity. And asking a person to add that to their current job is a pretty significant question. And the person you need to be most worried about is your pastor, because we do not want pastor burnout. So we want to protect them. So if we need a letter from the pastor, it's a good idea if somebody else does a first draft and just gives them a red pen and so take 1 minute to improve this letter that's about to go out, rather than saying, would you write a letter that says this? And that's dangerous because it could take 2 hours of their time and they might put it off because they've got other priorities. So the most intense time expenditure is in that first 6 months of doing the feasibility study and capital campaign. And we want to carry the vast majority of the load. We want to limit the staff time expenditure. Well, what we hope is the pastor and church business administrator would join us for a weekly 1 hour meeting. And we want them during the capital campaign, the pastor to attend social events where we get people's questions answered, but we do not want to overly burden the staff during the campaign. In the 3 year follow-up, we are with you for 3 years and we do not want to be overwhelmed. Again, the bookkeeping and accounting staff is going to track the capital campaign pledges, and that will ratchet up their work a little bit because we've got a report on how much have you pledged, how much do you still do, do you still need to remit? We want to decrease the stress on staff. That's it's a big priority of ours. Now let's talk.
Dennis, I might just
Go
mention
ahead.
this may seem like a small detail, but even when we suggest, okay, Pastor, we really need you to do an announcement, this Sunday or in all the masses, whatever denomination, you're affiliated with. And so we would say, we would love to be able to, send you 3 or 4 bullets or talking points. So we would script it out so that we really at every step try to save the pastor time and make sure that we're on the right topic. And so any chance we can write a letter, save a staff person or the pastor time, we're on the lookout for that.
Wow, that's great. I got another question from the chat function. Person said, we are knee deep in a social hall renovation. Does that make sense when you look at the macro view of declining attendance and forecast future behaviors. The church hall is extraordinarily important now, and it will become more so in the future. Referring back to George Barna, the church researcher, he had a shocking discovery of a survey of thousands of people on why did you join that church? And there are many reasons, but the dominant reason was for social connecting reasons. Usually, a church shopper visits 5 different churches, and we can predict in their life cycle when they might make those shopping visits. And what we have discovered is that the foyer, the social hall, the act of greeting is extraordinarily important. So please make your facilities reflect and accommodate those social connecting. Now, parenthetically, I would recommend that you heavily invest in social media. I propose that you ask in your feasibility study, would you be comfortable of us allocating 10% of the funds that are raised to go towards marketing so that people can find our church? Now, the old word for that was evangelism. That's no longer a cool word. So now the trends say call it marketing because we're comfortable with what that means. So we have to be very deliberate. A whole lot of church shopping happens online. So you got to ask yourself, when someone is church shopping, they're going to enter the term church and this zip code. And their churches will pop up. They're going to scroll through a couple pages. They're going to click. When your church pops up on the top half of that opening page, is there a 30-second welcoming video from your pastor? Are there several welcoming videos equally short from male, female, young, old that say very quickly and easily, this is what I like about this church? Because this is how church shoppers act. Do you do that? Probably not. Most of us are not very good at it. Why not? Well, we don't have the budget for it. Well, please get the budget. Your feasibility study can tell you if there's support for allocating a portion of the funds that is raised for marketing. Is it important? Well, in the corporate sector, marketing is a very important thing. It has a return on investment. We should imitate a little bit the corporate world in our approach to being found by those who are seeking a church home. Okay, now in a feasibility study, a very important part is interviews. The norm is to conduct 30 interviews. Sometimes it's a couple, sometimes it's just individuals. It would be done largely on site, like as is portrayed here. It could also be done by Zoom. It could also be done by phone. But in those interviews, we want to talk to those mavens that Malcolm Gladwell talked about in the book, The Tipping Point. Who are the opinion leaders? Who are connected? Who's current and past members of your leadership group? People who are lead donors, people who are active, and if you've got volunteer greeters, get them involved. So we want a really good cross section of the members of the congregation, and we want to visit with them in person. Now I'm going to ask Darryl to talk for a minute about his experience conducting hundreds and hundreds of interviews, but I tell you, the one that sticks out with me was a church in Colorado where the couple was mad at the church and they were mad at me and they were not sure that the project was the right thing. It was a thorough beating. I got beat up for about an hour. And when we came to the question about would you support it financially, they looked at each other and shook their heads. And I thought, okay, this is going to be bad news. The wife said, well, yes, we will. And the husband said, well, count us in for 25,000. And I thought, holy smokes, I just been beat up for an hour and you're going to donate 25,000. So
That's
Carl
right.
Rogers is a father of American psychology, and his primary thrust was active listening plays such an important role in relationships and mental health and processing. That's kind of what happens during these interviews. We do an hour of active listening to really try to figure out what is this maven thinking and feeling, and how can we learn from that. Okay, Darryl, tell us about your experience conducting a million of these interviews.
Well, we've also had experience with people who, excuse me, are similar to the interview that you were referring to in Colorado, but at the time of the feasibility study, they don't, they don't say anything about what they would give. But then as they're continually to be engaged during the capital campaign, serving on a team, coming to an event, being a part of a town hall meeting, then they actually get on board, and I've seen people give a variety, maybe $5,000, $10,000, depending on how God has blessed them, maybe 50 or $100,000. There's one lady who in the United Methodist Church in Kansas City, Missouri, and she was kind of caught sideways a little bit in a relationship with a staff person, just interacting with them within the ministry of the church, and had some kind of bruised feelings about it, but then was able to get more engaged in the church, and that began kind of working itself out, and she wound up giving, I think, $30,000, $50,000. Has been several years ago. So sometimes it happens, like Dennis said, just boom, right on the spot. Someone is negative and they really surprise you with yes, I'll give, support the capital campaign. Sometimes it takes a little bit more engagement and interaction, but all those points of engagement, interaction, really are important and can make a difference. Not just in the goal of getting a pledge from them, but getting them more engaged in the life of the church.
Yeah.
So all that's really important and has big picture implications.
Yeah, and that engagement really is the key. The two key successes are engagement up front and prayer and discernment before they make their gift. Now, at St. James, we had a dialogue with a leadership donor prospect asking her opinion, her thoughts, her feelings, her suggestions. And it was a very boring project. It was the roof. And she cared about the church. She grew up there, a very caring person. And she said, well, yeah, it is important. And I know that you're probably going to spend a lot of money. And I would like to make a donation. So count me in for $1 million. There was a collective heart failure upon hearing the good news. But would she have responded like that if it was just a sales pitch, just a hard sales pitch? I don't know. But certainly it was a wonderful experience to engage her in the dialogue and ask her questions and seek her advice. And gosh, it just turned out fantastically. Okay. Now, B, we're going to have the Survey Monkey will be up for everybody, and we give plenty of time for everyone to participate. We have paper surveys at the back at church for everyone to participate in, and just drop it back at the office, and then they send it to us in the office and we input that. What comes out of it is a report with super specific recommendation. What will work here? What will not work? What are the unmet needs? This is how we really tailor the capital campaign. Now, if you don't do a feasibility study, you're flying blind. Just like when I was in fifth grade, every year we would go to Sears and Roebuck to buy clothes before the first day of school. And they were generic. They were too big at the beginning of school. They fit around Christmas time. And then by Easter, they're too small. So one size does not fit everyone all the time. So you want a tailored campaign that meets your unique needs. I remember another church, and it was in Colorado, and I had a handwritten notes scribbled in the side where a person said, I think we should buy that property adjacent to the church. If you choose to do that, I'll pay for it. And of course, I'm reading, it's a paper survey, it wasn't online. So I'm reading and I think, well, maybe I should follow up on that. And they were stunned that I actually read the survey, and stunned that they received a phone call after that. And I very gently facilitated that really wonderful, generous gift as well. Item D, financial forecast. We're about 95% accurate. Now, I just had a failure recently, and I met with a committee last night trying to analyze together, all of our brains together, what happened? Why did we not hit our mark? And it was a really wonderful discussion, and we're writing this up for future uses for the next capital campaign. You know, every churches now seem to be on a 5-year cycle. Everybody seems to do a capital campaign every 5 years, just like universities do now. So, do we have a good sense of what happened in this campaign so we plan that campaign? So, we're writing that up. But it is, I think, failure analysis is extremely important. 95% of the time, we are spot on. And if we're off, there's usually some very interesting reason as why we are off. And I really want to mine that, learn everything that we can, share it with everybody that we encounter. Like if you're going to do this, we will do this same webinar with your committee, and it'll be more interactive, and we can talk it through. We can make this presentation, shrink it down to 15 or 20 minutes, and then open the floor for dialogue. But I think failure analysis is just a very healthy thing. So usually our financial forecasts are spot on, and it's great to know going into it what's going to happen and how does that fit with our big picture vision. Now, this is a diagram of our feasibility study timeline, and usually takes 6 weeks. Again, I'm going to send this out to you when we are done, so you will have this, so you don't have to write it down. You'll have this tomorrow or the next day to understand what does it look like. Now, feel free to print this and share this with your committee, but this is really pretty normal. We've done it in as short as 4 weeks, and if you're in a leisurely time frame, we can stretch it out to beyond that. These are all topics that you might imagine that we cover. We want to look at past capital campaigns, past annual campaigns. We want to take a look at your vision and your goal. We want to analyze your membership and your regular giving. We want to look at your socioeconomic demographics of your zip code. We want to look at your mailing list. We spend a lot of time writing the case statement and the survey questions that you would have a lot of participation with as we develop that. As we develop the survey instrument, we want to use your language. When we conduct the personal interviews, usually they are at the church. They could be Zoom or phone, that's fine. We collect all the data, analyze it, compare you to 100 other similar churches, and then prepare a final report that we then visit with you in person to present. And then we write a newsletter that will go out to everybody, because nobody's going to read a 50-page document. At best, they're going to read a couple paragraphs with 5 bullet points. And so we want to prepare that to send that out to everybody. So this would be a fairly normal timeline. Now, communication was one of the reasons that was stated last night, and why were we a failure. We did not communicate enough, and we did not focus on the why. So that was one person's perception. Now, whether other people had that same perception or not is up for grabs, but I really wanted to hear feedback. So no matter how much we communicate, it always seems to be not enough. So focus on over communicating. So can we do this? Can we communicate thoroughly every single week? Can we do it in visual ways through videos, print in the bulletin, email, even text messaging? So and really focus on the why. Why are we doing this? Is it just so the building looks prettier? No. It is really to fulfill their mission of evangelization through hospitality and community building. And we had some people that were just really dead set against this addition. And it wasn't just that portico, but the first roof line behind that. So we really did increase that building footprint by about 30% for the welcoming activity. I remember going to church there later, and the activity in the foyer was just like a beehive. It was a delight. So we think that it's going to take somebody 100 to 200 hours during a capital campaign just to do the communicating. And that is a really important investment. So you're going to do the newsletter, video, email, social media, the bulletin, even verbal announcements. Darryl, before we move off of communication, am I missing anything on how important it is or how we proceed?
One thing I've learned through the years is those who are the core members of the church or the parish, they're going to be mostly in tune to the communication. And so when we communicate in a lot of different ways the same message, uh, it's often that those core members, core parishioners will say, I think we're over communicating. Then I found through the years that we're probably just about right, because it takes so many different mediums of communication and repetition. And so a lot of times I think we may think, oh well, we've communicated that, and we need to do more. So that's just a little nugget I feel like I've learned through the years.
That's great. Thank you, buddy. All right, before we move on to our last two slides, we're gonna have a summary and then an added bonus, the Ask Gwen slide. But I got a note here from a capital campaign that's just wrapping up from a gentleman named Paul, that campaign was just marvelous, and Paul was a fantastic leader. And I'm really indebted to my coworker, Peter, who took over and managed the campaign because I had a wicked surgery just right as that was taking off. And Peter stepped in seamlessly, and it turned out to be in his hometown of New Jersey. So it was just an absolute delight. But Paul asked the questions about vision and our strategic plan. As we look ahead, how frequently or when should we look back at our vision and our strategic plan to assess our progress towards that? Now, this is really a good question. For 10 years before I started working with churches on their capital campaigns, I was a strategic planning facilitator for nonprofit organizations. In my opinion, it ought to be a 3-year cycle that looks ahead 5 years. So every 3 years, take a good hard look at our vision and our strategies. Where are we heading? How are we going to get there? And where does the building improvements fit in that? And it should be done by your leadership council, whatever you call your leadership group that includes the pastor that sets policy. In the corporate world, that board really is the most important arm of the church. They're the executive function, thinking ahead, thinking about strategies. Strategic planning theory, as articulated by authors Kepner and Strago, say you should have no more than 2 strategies. If you have 27 strategies, it's like having none. So really, what are your priorities? Now, those priorities might change over time. At Paul's church, they had a flood, which ruined their kitchen, which was adjacent to their parish hall. And everybody who's active in a church knows the kitchen, the food, the parish hall, that's the life of the church. So that's extremely important. Now they're just embarking on dealing with the source of flooding and improving the kitchen. So 2 years from now, that won't be a priority because they're done. So 3 years from now, it'd be a good idea to revisit what's our vision and what are our priority methods to take us there. Like everyone else, like we've talked about already just a moment ago, I believe marketing is absolutely crucial for us in the church world. People, I do believe that that quote, I think it was from St. Augustine. Darryl, you're a theologian, you can correct me. Our hearts are restless until we rest in thee. I believe that we all have this part inside of us that's seeking a meaningful spiritual life. So there are 5 predictable times when people do go church shopping. How can they find us? Okay. It used to be one friend tells another friend, or a neighbor tells another neighbor. And now it's not that way at all. It is by far searching on the web. So what do you do to be found? That's the question. And I think every strategic plan for every church, that ought to be one of their two strategic priorities. And just forgive me for my own biases. I think the other one is, how are we doing welcoming people when they come in that door? I think we should spend money on that. And there's some churches who do really well. Most of us do not do very well. Okay, so let's move off of communicating and let's do it. It's go time. So to summarize what we have covered, and if there are any other last questions, put them in that chat box right now, and I will take a look as we move towards our conclusion. We've got 2 minutes before we wrap it up. You're going to begin by engaging your leadership group. Present the challenge, ask for their opinion on how we move ahead. You're going to invest some time and energy in gathering information so that you're equipped intellectually. I'm working with a church, Darryl and I are working with a church right now in Colorado, where they have had a marvelous committee working for the past 18 months, just investing their hearts and souls into their campus and each of the 4 buildings on their campus to analyze what's wrong, what challenges do we have. So we've got some really good information to equip our discussion on what do we need to address in this capital campaign. So God bless that committee for investing all that time to gather information. Number 3, building consensus. I think a great way to do that is multiple town hall meetings. All it takes is you got to have a facilitator. Just stick around after church, have some sandwiches. We're going to have it right here or in the hall. Take a little bit of time, give us your feedback, and then we're going to report the next day on what we learned from you. And we might have a second town hall meeting if we need it as well to pursue consensus. Number 4, spend the money, take the time, make it formal, conduct a feasibility study. To me, having an x-ray before surgery alleviates such anxiety. Can we be a success? How much will we raise? What do we have to do before we launch our capital campaign? I think a feasibility study is just absolutely crucial. I wouldn't do a campaign in my church without it. That is for sure. And usually, if money is a concern, usually you can get someone else on your leadership group to pay for it. That happens just virtually all the time. A call or an email to a dozen people that says, hey, we're going to spend $14,000 on a feasibility study. Pardon me. Could you help cover the cost? I get a lot of yeses that way. So frequently the feasibility study really doesn't cost anything. Number 5, communicate. Start thinking now how you can really conduct a full court press in every possible way. And if you hire us, we'll be on board and we can do the bulk of that work. And it is work. Takes a lot of time, but like anything else, people are very appreciative and it increases people's level of generosity. So the best time to do anything is to take action now. The best time is now, rather than waiting 5 years of contemplating. Right now, the stock market is at an all-time high. I would encourage you to take advantage of that. The way things go, usually you have one donor that will give you 10% of all the funds you raise, 10 that give you 40%. So from your top 10, 11, 12, you're going to get about half of all the money that you raise. Beyond that, usually your top 100, including those top 10 or 11 or 12, gives you about 80% of all the funds that are raised. The level of the stock market does have an influence on them, really above almost anything else. So right now is a very good time to do a church capital campaign by recommending leaping into action. All right, Darryl, any last comments before we shift into the final bonus and then we wrap it up, the Ask Gwen? Any last comments, buddy?
I think it's great that we had such a great group today interested in this topic. So we appreciate you being a part of it, and we really are uh, happy to help you. We consider ourselves more than just fundraisers. We're wanting the very best for the church and the big picture of the church and how it operates. So anyway, thank you for being here today.
Right. It is a joy. It is a joy to work with churches. They help each of us address our highest spiritual aspirations, and it is a pleasure to be a servant to you. Now, as our final gift to you, if you send us a note at Denis at church-development.com or Darryl Prater at church-development.com or outreach at church-development.com, or you just reply when we send you this note. We have a lovely um, volunteer member of our team, Gwen, who has just been through a church capital campaign, and she is a church stewardship professional on staff at a church. We just finished doing a capital campaign. She volunteered and said, if anybody has any questions and want to ask somebody who's just been through it, send me an email. Her name is Gwen, Gwen. We think she is awesome. And she has been in the trenches for the last couple of years. So this is our gift to you. So if we can do anything to serve you, and let me reiterate, we can do the same presentation with your committee. Darryl or I could do it at any night of the week and shrink this presentation to a few minutes and then spend some time asking questions. It is a service that we are delighted to provide. So until then, I wish you good luck. God bless. Go forth and conquer. Amen. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.